Was Joseph Smith a Freemason, and did this have any influence on the restoration of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? Yes. Does this mean I should toss out my belief in the validity of anything he said or did? What? No. Hey everybody, and welcome to Latter-day Divers, where we dive into the words of ancient and modern prophets. My name is Perez, and today I want to share with you some highlights from a recently published book titled Method Infinite, Freemasonry and the Mormon Restoration. I was pretty fascinated by this comprehensive study authored by Cheryl Bruno, Joe Swick III, and Nicholas Literski. Now this is maybe a sensitive or controversial topic, but I think it's a valid part of church history, and I believe that knowledge by study and faith is power. Now the book is pretty long, tiny words, a lot of footnotes.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
But since I'm a nerd, I read it, and today I'm going to give you 10 fun facts on Masonry and Mormonism. Thanks for being with me today, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more Latter-day Dives. For starters, Freemasonry is a fraternal organization that dates back hundreds of years and harkens back to antiquity and promotes morality and service through ritual and symbolic instruction and advancement through a variety of degrees and orders. Now, let's see what Masonry has to do with Joseph Smith and the Restoration. You ready? Let's dive.
Sound 2 blasts of dive alarm, pass the word dive, dive.
Dive, dive.
Freemasonry was huge in the early United States. In fact, many historians have said that the time of Freemasonry's greatest power and prestige was the period from 1790 to about 1826. Right around the time of the first vision. Joseph Smith's father was initiated into Freemasonry, as well as his older brother Hiram, and there's evidence to suggest that his oldest brother Alvin, who he looked up to a ton, was also a Freemason. The name Hiram is also the name of one of the central legendary figures in Masonic lore, and it wasn't uncommon for people at that time to name their sons Hiram after him. A lot of the early members of the church were Freemasons who joined, or became Freemasons sometimes after joining the church. All this to say, with so many Masonic connections and with relatively ample access to libraries, bookstores, and newspapers, the Smith family was surrounded by opportunities to be exposed to Masonic ritual, literature, and thought. As one author suggested, Palmyra became known as a strong Masonic town. One might say that young Joseph was providentially placed to absorb ideas that would later contribute to the vitality of Mormonism. Freemasonry took a hard hit when a disaffected Mason named William Morgan disappeared in 1826. Morgan had threatened to write an expose on Masonry and was basically kidnapped and most likely murdered, although technically his body was never found. This became a huge national scandal, and Masonry came to be viewed as a cultic threat to democracy. As a result, we had the formation of the anti-Mason political party, and a lot of Masons actually resigned from their lodges. One of the biggest parts of this book that blew my mind was the intimate connections made between the disappeared William Morgan and the Joseph Smith family. First, it is possible, though not fully confirmed, that William Morgan met Joseph Smith Jr. sometime after the first vision and was sympathetic to his message. During a stint in prison for unpaid debts, Joseph Smith Sr. spent some time as a cellmate of Eli Bruce, one of the few people convicted for the kidnapping of William Morgan. In her family memoir, Lucy Smith described her husband's cellmate as a man committed for murder. Since technically the body was never found, her description of him as a murderer shed some light on the negative or condemnatory estimation they had on Freemasonry at the time. And this is important, we'll come back to this later. William Morgan's widow, Lucinda, would eventually remarry and embrace Mormonism and join the church. She would receive a patriarchal blessing at the hands of Joseph Smith Sr., stating that her deceased husband, William Morgan, actually was saved and had a place in the paradise of God. Some historians believe that Lucinda became a plural wife of Joseph Smith, not for sure, but at least that they shared a good friendship. And lastly, after Joseph Smith revealed the doctrine of vicarious baptism, William Morgan was one of the first individuals to receive the ordinance. Why does this matter? The Smith family's sympathetic feelings towards Morgan reveal that they believed that he was murdered by Masons, and therefore believed that the ancient fraternity had become corrupted and degenerate. And this was actually a major theme and movement within Masonry itself. There was a belief that pure Masonry had become corrupted and was in need of a prophet who would restore it to its pure and ancient form. Encouraged by his own family as well as a community that was sympathetic to the need for a new dispensation of the universal brotherhood, Smith embraced the Masonic model that something vital had been lost, and he stepped in to restore the missing knowledge. Along with this legendary narrative of restoration, Masonic lore also contained powerful themes of being brought from darkness into light, of priesthood, keys, code names, temple building, and of restoring long-lost words concealed on plates by ancient prophets. In fact, while some have argued that early members read the Book of Mormon as an anti-Masonic text because of its aversion towards secret combinations and Gadianton robbers, Bruno, Swick, and Literski argue that it made more sense to have read it as a comprehensive view of two rival groups, that being pure Masonry and spurious or corrupted Masonry. They write that it was Masonry, all pervasive in Smith's family and in his environment, that provided the particular wording and images used by Smith. An example of borrowed wording that I think is interesting is the concept of degrees. In Masonry, you advance or ascend towards the presence of God in degrees. As Latter-day Saints, we're familiar with the concept of degrees of glory. But have you ever noticed that the word degrees is nowhere to be found in the classic Revelation section 76 that first introduced the degrees of glory in 1832? As far as I can tell, scripturally at least, the word degrees was not used until 1843 in section 131. This was given a year after Joseph Smith was initiated into Freemasonry. Coincidence? I'm not sure. So what did Joseph Smith himself and other early church members have to say about Freemasonry? Here are just a few examples. Eliza R. Snow, an early church leader and prolific writer, said, "There is method in Mormonism, method infinite. Mormonism is Masonic." Elder Roger Clausen recorded in his personal diary in 1899 the words of then President of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, Elder Franklin D. Richards, who had himself become a Master Mason when the Saints were in Nauvoo. Elder Richards said, "Joseph the prophet was aware that there were some things about Masonry which had come down from the beginning, and he desired to know what they were. The Masons admitted some keys of knowledge appertaining to Masonry were lost. Joseph inquired of the Lord concerning the matter, and he revealed to the prophet true Masonry, as we have it in our temples." Elder Heber C. Kimball wrote the following to Parley P. Pratt: "There is a similarity of priesthood in Masonry. Brother Joseph says Masonry was taken from priesthood, but has become degenerated, but many things are perfect." And lastly, Brigham Young delighted to speak of the temple endowment as celestial Masonry. In their beautiful city of Nauvoo, the Saints received authorization to establish their own Masonic lodge. At first, this lodge met in the upper room of Joseph Smith's red brick store, where he himself was initiated in March of 1842. Shortly after that, they built an official Masonic lodge nearby. That lodge has been reconstructed today. The sign today says Cultural Hall, but if you read the fine print, it was a Masonic lodge. The Saints also started other lodges. They pumped out new Freemasons way faster than usual, and along with some other irregularities, they got in trouble with the presiding lodges, and eventually their charter was revoked. But before his death, although not the Grand Master, Joseph Smith was still pretty involved. For example, in 1842, Smith's total recorded attendance at lodge meetings was 27 meetings on 19 different days. He attended more than twice as many Masonic meetings than any other member or officer of a non-Mormon Illinois lodge that year, and he continued to attend, though less often, in the years 1843 and 1844. And although it's been said that after the temple endowment was fully restored and up and going, that Freemasonry ceased among the Latter-day Saints, it actually continued. They continued to initiate and teach Masons, showing that temple endowment notwithstanding, the Saints did see some value in the Masonic fraternity and in Masonic instruction. And this is probably common knowledge by now, but it's believed that Joseph Smith's last words before being murdered at Carthage jail were actually the Masonic grand hailing sign of distress. Joseph said, "O Lord my God," before being cut short. The Masonic cry for distress is, "O Lord my God, is there no help for a widow's son?" There were clearly Masons in the mob who, upon hearing the distress cry, would have been obligated to drop everything and come to Joseph's aid because of the fraternal oaths that they had taken. But clearly this was not the case. Even early church members attributed Masonic intentions to Joseph Smith's last words. Zena D.H. Huntington, one of Joseph's plural wives and later a General Relief Society president, said, "I am the widow of a master mason who, when leaping from the window of Carthage jail, pierced with bullets, made the Masonic sign of distress. But those signs were not heeded except by the God of heaven." In the book, Bruno, Literski, and Swick share some interesting evidence that suggests that Joseph and Hiram's deaths may have been a Masonic conspiracy aimed at stopping them from gaining too much power over the national lodge movement based on how quickly the Latter-day Saint lodges were growing and spreading. After Joseph's death, the various groups that splintered from Mormonism each retained elements of Masonic influence. Although he presided over the Saints' Masonic lodges in conjunction with the Nauvoo Temple, Brigham Young, Joseph's successor, decided that it was best not to bring Masonry into Utah with Mormonism. He felt that at this point it would only hinder the church and its work, and he was also worried that if non-Mormon Masons gained too much influence in Utah, they would actually conspire to kill Brigham Young and other church leaders. We read that though he opposed establishing a Grand Lodge in Utah, Brigham Young continued to identify as a Mason by wearing his Masonic pin, and he used Masonic references in his speeches, indicating his continued belief in the literal nature of Masonic myth. However, after the tragedy at Mountain Meadows, Young removed his Masonic pin and never wore it again, aware that Freemasons from Arkansas, possibly including members of the Fancher Party, were responsible for the murder of Apostle Parley P. Pratt. And number 10. Honestly, this is the only part of the video I didn't script out. Number 10 is that none of this amazing context and these connections and these Masonic remnants within Mormonism invalidate Joseph Smith's role or calling as a restorer, as a prophet, as someone who was inspired of God to create something that could benefit and bring God's children closer to the Savior of the world. I'm grateful that God can use the context around us and place us in very specific circumstances where we can be influenced and enlightened by things that may seem man-made, but which God can use for higher and holier purposes. And this is tricky, you know, there's a lot of things we don't understand, and Masonry can be that kind of stumbling block. But as Elder Stevenson taught in a general conference a couple of years ago, when he referred to solar eclipses, just because something is an obstacle or seems to be blocking out the light, doesn't mean that the light is not there. And so there may be obstacles or things in our faith that we don't understand, but it doesn't invalidate the beauty of the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ and what Joseph was able to use collectively and bring to the table in a way that could become inspired and refined. And as Latter-day Saints today, we're so far removed from this type of culture, from this type of ritual, from this type of instruction, that maybe it's hard for us to appreciate temple worship or some of the things that the early Latter-day Saints recognized and appreciated, for better or for worse. But understanding this context might help us be a little more open-minded to some of the ways that the Lord has chosen, or at least allowed, instruction to be presented to the Latter-day Saints. In summary, Joseph's prophetic charisma and magnetic personality allowed him to use many different avenues to animate Mormonism. Freemasonry was not the only ingredient that went into the mix, but it was a vital one. Joseph's interpretation of Masonic ritual deepened its value for Latter-day Saint participants, and once he had given his followers an idea of the possibilities inherent in Masonry, they united to draw friends and associates to their prophet's vision of Freemasonry restored. Thank you for diving with me today. A little bit different than usual, but I hope you found it fun and insightful. Now, the book is fascinating, but it's not perfect, and some of their connections and arguments are stronger than others, but it's still a very interesting part of LDS church history, and I only covered a fraction. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video, help us grow. And I am by no means an expert on all this, but if anyone has concerns, questions, comments, I'm happy to chat with you in the comments to this video, or send me a message on @LatterDayDivers on Instagram. You guys are awesome. Hope to see you next time on Latter-day Divers. Have a great life.